Hi, my name's Bryce, and today we'll be having a debate on the future of corporate scandals within society. I will be starting today by arguing for the affirmative, and with that being that corporate scandals are likely to increase in the future. There is no doubt that corporate scandals and fraud will only continue to increase into the future. I can make this statement not only due to the amount of corporate frauds and unethical behaviours occurring currently, but also due to the increased rate of incidents with which these scandals are occurring. It is only too clear within the scandals that will be discussed here today that there is an obvious set of underlying principles that connect and link the actions of all these people involved. These principles include putting profit before reputation, having a skewed balance of power, and having ethically corrupt leaders in positions within these organisations, positions of power. Today we'll be discussing Volkswagen, 7-Eleven, News of the World is the last one we're going to talk about. In December 2014, Volkswagen decided to recall 500,000 cars. Now, they had to recall these cars due to a fault that they had in their system. And now this would have been a perfect opportunity for Volkswagen to admit that they'd made a mistake to the American public. They chose not to do that though. They chose to not only conceal the fact that they'd put an engineering system in there which relayed back a false number for their emissions report, but they then continued for a further 12 months to deceive the Americans' public trust by saying that these cars were appropriate or accurate. Due to the Volkswagen managerial hubris, they not only neglected to resolve the issue internally, but they continued to deceive the public's trust again. And that's a big statement. Now, this is a clear indication that profits were more important to them than their reputation. They'd chosen to put profits above their public's perception of their company. 7-Eleven had a very similar scandal where they were caught systematically underpaying their employees by either forcing them to lodge lesser hours for their working weeks or by forcing them to give back money that they had earned legitimately in an effort to increase the profitability of their own stores. Again, this is a significant and unequivocal indication that they are concerned more about profit margins than they are about how the public thinks about their company. It took a whistleblower to come forward to actually highlight the full extent of this deception to the public. I have a quote that was written in the Sydney Morning Herald. Head office is not just turning a blind eye, it's a fundamental part of their business. They can't run 7-Eleven as profitably, as successfully as they have in the past. This type of ethically corrupt leadership enables franchises who are predominantly from non-English speaking backgrounds to enforce their own cultural standards within Australia. The News of the World article, Rupert Murdoch, tone is set from the top as we know that. He has allowed an atmosphere or a culture of corporate wrongdoing through his hiring of inadequate staff. I will finish by reading out some statistics from the Kroll Global Fraud Report from 2015-16. The report states that in the US, fraud has increased in prevalence by 9% from the 2013-14 period. Brazil has increased by 3%. Mexico has increased by 17%. Colombia, 20%. China, 6%. India, 11%. This clearly and definitively indicates that fraudulent behaviour and scandals will only continue to increase into the future.
Thanks, Bryce. My name's Matthew, and I'll be presenting the argument as to why corporate scandals and frauds are likely to reduce in the future. I'd just like to start by pointing out that we don't live in a perfect world, and finance is a vulnerable profession. This means that there is a temptation to act out of self-interest, and Bryce has highlighted a few examples of that. There's also a vast difference between cultural standards in different countries. There is a culture of maybe acceptance of bribery and corruption in certain developing nations as opposed to the more developed nations where legislation is developed and improved in light of scandals and as they happen. But I'd like to also point out that although it seems scandals are rife in corporate culture, I'd like to shift the focus as to what has already been done to limit these in the hope that I can change your perspective. A lot of industry bodies have formed strict code of ethics, which member firms must agree and adhere to. Following on from this, most corporate positions now have what's called a balanced scorecard. This is a range of performance metrics an employee must adhere to. Their annual performance is judged upon this, and they must satisfy these metrics in order to qualify for a bonus. These scorecards often include sections such as customer satisfaction, compliance rating, community work, and all these things are designed in order to combat the temptation to act in self-interest. Financial penalties for professional misconduct is rising, and some of the more progressive firms have even gone as far as to employ a corporate ethics officer. Although this is a relatively new position, more and more firms are employing these, not just because of the rising penalties, but to show that they are actively trying to reduce such issues and ultimately help the perception of their brand in the market. Further to this, ethics education has become more commonplace. I personally have worked at 2 of the big 4 banks where I've been required to take 2 days out during a week to sit a course, and this course clearly defines where my employers and society in general draw the line where it comes to ethics in business. This goes back to part of that balanced scorecard. It forms part of that as well. This shows the commitment currently being made to curb bad employee behaviour. We can now look at history and determine why corporate social responsibility has broadened its focus, especially in recent history where the media has amplified the pressure on corporations who are suspected of foul play. With such a widespread influence on society that media has, negative media can cause severe reputation damage or possibly to the point causing the firm to collapse. This, along with rising penalties, is the ultimate motivator for corporations to implement further means of reducing unethical behaviour. In closing, I would like to make the point that both employers and employees are very well aware of the consequences of unethical practices. The process from discovery to punishment can be highly stressful and come at a great cost for those at the centre of the controversy. I think this is the reason why corporations are making moves to alleviate this unethical behaviour. I agree that there's definitely a lot more that can be done, but a clear objective is there to reduce corporate scandals in the future. Thank you.
Just to quickly rebut a couple of points that Matthew made there. He mentioned that corporations and companies have been instilling ethical standards. And I would put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that's been going on for 5 or 10 years almost. It's not a new practice. It's certainly not something that's happened overnight. And even having those practices or code of conducts within organisations, we've still seen an increase in prevalence, which is a testament to how ineffective these measures actually are. And I believe that financial penalties aren't severe enough. Therefore, I think they'll continue to increase. Thank you.
Okay, and just if I may rebut on a couple of the things that Bryce had mentioned as well. First, in the Kroll report, if you look at the regions that he mentioned, I think of those, we'd look at Europe and the US, where there's quite a lot of legislation and things going on to curb this behaviour. There's more commonplace, if you like, in some of the other areas mentioned, such as Mexico, Brazil, Africa, where there's a lot more foul play. If we go back to Europe and specifically with the Volkswagen scandal, and the EU is currently working on bringing legislation into force where if a manufacturer does try to basically change the output on a report for anything to do with their car, the fine proposed is €30,000 per car. But I think that's quite a financial incentive to not play up in this area. Would you not agree?
We're now going into part B of the assignment, talking about how both employees and employers can work together, or what's required of them in order to reduce corporate scandals going forward. We understand now that the culture in these corporations is set from the top, from the CEO down. And I think it'd be too easy just to say that changing the recruitment strategy would be enough in order to reduce it from an employer's perspective. I think they have to start looking at a promotional process. I think if they start now looking at using ethical standards as the baseline for their not only recruitment but their promotional aspects, so to get to the level of being a CEO or a CFO or on the board of directors, I think that now if we start making people be more ethically sensitive, then that's going to help employers as a general rule, because that's where the actual culture is coming from. So if they say hardline, it's not okay to do this, and we don't want to tarnish our reputation, then that's going to have a filtering down effect to everyone beneath them.
I'd agree 100%. Definitely managers, there's a tendency to promote high-performing employees over the more ethical employees. I've seen it myself in the banks. It is more often than not the employee who has performed in the top 10 or 20 in the country, they end up getting promoted. And we see similar things abroad. I was reading a study done in Texas where a sample were required to appraise a fictional salesperson's performance, and it was found that job performance overcame the appraiser's ethical bias. This meant that the high performers were rated better and given the promotion. There was also, while it was suggested that the ethical tone is set from the top or the managers, the attitude of the group or employees' peers can have a massive impact on the individual's ethical decision making.
It's especially for younger employees that come straight out of uni and are very malleable. You certainly don't want to do something that may jeopardise what you've got in your own head as your career. Like you're certainly not going to say no to a high level manager or a line manager. It takes a lot of courage, and it's very hard to put your foot down and say, well, hang on, I know that's wrong. Well, I think the onus is on employers and corporations to create a better atmosphere, a culture where people don't necessarily have to fear for their career progression or their livelihood, because some of these people envision a 20-year career in banking, and then all of a sudden they're going to be out within 3 years because of everyone else around them, if everyone else is doing it, and then they start satisfying rather than actually resolving the dilemma, because they just rationalise that if everyone's doing it, it's okay for me to do it.
Absolutely. Definitely. And this leads into my next point, because I think it's really important that units like this are mandatory for business students. And I think for new employees entering the job market, I think it's really important that they ask themselves this serious question, that is, am I truly passionate about this, or am I just chasing the money? Because as we all know, the finance industry, it can be incredibly financially rewarding. And of course, we require money to survive. But I would just say that, if the sole purpose of entering the industry is because of money, then there's a serious problem, because if that's your major motivator, then it is likely that the employee may not act ethically when push comes to shove.